Charles and I were bitter rivals for over a decade. The battle between an Omega and an Alpha never ceased. On the night before graduation, we accidentally slept together, and I fled in a panic the next morning. It wasn't until my family went bankrupt and I was driven into a corner, holding my baby, that I had no choice but to knock on his door. "Charles, let me stay. I really have nowhere else to go." He stared at the baby in my arms, his tone icy. "You want me to take in my rival and someone else's child?" Only then did I realize that this idiot didn't remember that night at all. Chapter 1. "Charles, I'm begging you." I stood at the door holding my sleeping baby while Charles looked down at me from his towering height. Nervousness made me unconsciously hold the child tighter. The news of the Wilson family's bankruptcy had spread throughout the city. Our houses and assets had all been seized. Used to a life of luxury and privilege, I suddenly didn't know where to turn. When looking for a job, every company shunned me for being an Omega with a child. If I hadn't been driven to a dead end, I never would have come to Charles. After all, the child was his too. Seeing him stay silent, I braced myself and continued. "Just a place to sleep is fine. Once I find a job, I'll take the baby and leave immediately. I won't cause you any trouble." Half a minute later, he finally spoke, his tone still unwelcoming. "Where is the child's father? Why don't you go find him?" I looked up at him, a bit dazed. "Don't you remember?" What should I remember? That sentence pierced me like a needle. The grievances of wandering around with my baby these past few days, having no fixed place to live, instantly surged in my heart. Getting pregnant by accident right after graduation. At first, I even thought about not keeping the child. I was completely unprepared to be a mother. But in the end, I couldn't bear to give him up. Charles's words became the last straw that broke the camel's back. I had originally thought he didn't come looking for me because he didn't care. I never expected he simply didn't remember. My eyes uncontrollably turned red. "Hey, why are you crying?" "Don't cry." He seemed a bit panicked. "Forget it. Come in first." Charles seemed to have never seen me shed tears before. His flustered state softened his tone. Ultimately, he let me through the door with the baby in my arms. The place was a 3-bedroom, 1-living-room apartment in the city center. The decor was minimalist, looking very much like a bachelor pad. The baby woke up, waving his little hands and whining. I placed him on the sofa and turned to Charles. "Sorry, do you have hot water?" Charles stood with his arms crossed and lifted his chin to point toward the kitchen. I took formula out of my bag, prepared the milk, and handed it to the baby, who immediately quieted down and started drinking. Charles just stood to the side, glancing over from time to time. "Does he not care about you too? Who are you talking about? With my family bankrupt and my father in prison, who else was there to care about me?" Charles gritted his teeth. "The child's father. He just lets you raise the child alone." I raised my eyes to look at him. Afraid the baby would start crying and fussing, I pulled on his arm. "Let's go talk on the balcony." As soon as we reached the balcony, Charles demanded aggressively, "Elliot, what were you thinking? Having a child at such a young age. And where is he now? Ignoring you completely? Did he abandon you out of fear of being implicated? You really were blind. Who is the father? I'll take you to go find him." I pressed my lips tightly together, my feelings complex. Learning that he had no idea he was the father made me both disappointed and relieved. At least I didn't have to worry about him fighting for custody. I hurriedly held him back. Don't go looking for him." Charles's face was livid. "You're still defending him at a time like this, and to think I always treated you as a worthy rival. Yet you're so disappointing." His gaze fell on our clasped hands. "Acting spoiled is useless." Charles and I practically grew up together. Our family backgrounds were comparable, and we had known each other since kindergarten. He had disliked me from a young age. In elementary school, I once tried to make peace with him and brought him my favorite candy. I didn't expect him to smack the candy right out of my hand. "Elliot, I hate you." Having been spoiled since childhood, I had never suffered such a grievance. After failing to show goodwill multiple times, I also lost my temper. "I hate you too." From then on, we became bitter rivals. Grades, competitions, university activities, we fought over everything. Whenever we met, we mocked each other, neither willing to yield an inch. I thought we would go on like that forever, until the night before graduation, when I unexpectedly went into heat and slept with him. Waking up the next day afraid of being ridiculed by him, I fled in a panic. Until my family went bankrupt and I had nowhere to go. The wind on the balcony brought my thoughts back. Just consider it me begging you. I don't have any other friends. Friends? Charles froze. Could their kind of relationship be considered friends? The once dazzling young master of the Wilson family, surrounded by people wherever he went. Once bankrupt, all those friends vanished without a trace. He felt an indescribable sensation in his heart, like punching cotton, muffled and stifling. Elliot had changed. Before, he was so proud, like a peacock. Now, he was so submissive, tamed by another alpha. Once I find a job and a place, I'll move out immediately. I won't bother you for too long. Perhaps it was an alpha's innate protective instinct toward an omega that made Charles unable to utter a refusal anymore. Charles's apartment was very large. He usually lived alone, so he hadn't prepared any extra rooms. Playing the good guy to the end, when he heard Elliot was going to clean up the guest room, he voluntarily offered up the master bedroom. You guys take the master bedroom. I can just sleep in the guest room. I felt a bit embarrassed. How can I do that? Only the master bedroom has AC, and it's too late to call someone to install one today. The weather is hot right now. If you don't want the child to get sick. Charles looked at Elliot's thin, frail frame. He hadn't thought he was that thin before, but looking at him now, he seemed to have lost quite a bit of weight. Thank you, Charles. In that moment, I was genuinely grateful. Entering the room and setting the baby down, my heart finally settled completely. I observed Charles's room. It was clean and minimalist, much like his personality. The bedsheets were dark blue, and a faint scent of coffee lingered in the room. Charles's pheromones. It wasn't as strong as I smelled that night. Perhaps because the environment and the scent were so relaxing. Holding the baby, I unknowingly fell asleep. The door to the master bedroom wasn't closed tightly. When Charles passed by, he peeked inside. Elliot was holding the child. The large one and the small one were both sleeping soundly. This scene held an inexplicable sense of warmth. Driven by some unknown force, he pushed the door open and walked in. He looked at Elliot first, then his gaze fell on the face of the child in his arms. His skin tone was inherited from Elliot, fair and tender, with chubby, fleshy cheeks, a milk bottle still dangling from his mouth. A faint scent of milk emanated from the baby's body, carrying a hint of coconut, smelling a bit like coconut milk. Having not seen him for over a year, he never expected that a year later, Elliot would appear at his house with a child. What does Elliot's child feel like? The next second, he reached out and poked the child's cheek. In his sleep, the baby reached out and grabbed randomly, catching his fingertip. A wondrous feeling spread through his heart. Chapter 2. I opened my eyes and saw someone squatting by the head of the bed. After reacting, I met Charles's gaze. I heard him speak. Elliot, is this really your child? My heart tightened. Did Charles remember something? So fair and chubby, you really gave birth to him? You didn't pick him up somewhere, did you? Hearing him finish, my initial nervousness vanished. I gave birth to him. The baby hadn't woken up. One of Charles's fingers was grasped by his little hand, and he reached out his other hand to poke the baby's fair, tender cheek again. Stop poking him, he'll wake up soon. Charles's playful mood flared up, and he pretended to be impatient. I gave up my bed for this little brat to sleep in. Can't I even touch him a couple of times? Little brat, your mom is truly an ungrateful little thing. You can't learn from him when you grow up. I am not. Stop talking nonsense. I pushed Charles's hand away, cradled the baby in my arms, and stared at Charles to prevent him from saying any more nonsense. Charles looked at Elliot, who had just woken up and looked fiercely protective of his calf, and the corners of his mouth ticked upward. Teasing Elliot successfully made him feel very amused. But the next second, he paid the price for his actions. The baby woke up after all and started wailing. The loud sound instantly shattered the tranquility of the room. Charles had never taken care of a child and didn't know how to handle it. watching that little face scrunch up and the crying shake the heavens. He suddenly panicked a bit. He almost subconsciously raised both hands, striking an "it has nothing to do with me" pose. His tone carried a bit of innocence and bewilderment. "Damn! I didn't do this. I just touched him gently a couple of times." I gave him a helpless look, hurriedly leaned over to carefully scoop the baby into my arms, and rocked him gently to soothe him. But the little guy clearly wasn't buying it. His crying didn't stop, and his little head kept nuzzling against my chest. "He's probably hungry," I judged, my cheeks feeling a bit hot. Charles clearly didn't get it. "Hungry? Then go make some more formula." He spoke while subconsciously turning his head toward the door, seemingly wanting to go get the milk bottle. "No." My voice dropped even lower. I felt terribly flushed. Even the roots of my ears were burning. Sometimes he needs to eat directly." Having said this much, the meaning couldn't be more obvious. Charles whipped his head around, his gaze unexpectedly falling on my chest before immediately darting away as if he'd been burned. That bit of composure from teasing me just now vanished without a trace, and a noticeable blush rapidly climbed from his neck to the tips of his ears. Oh, he responded, his voice a bit tight, his footsteps slightly erratic as he backed toward the door. Then you carry on." He practically power walked out of the bedroom, his arms and legs moving awkwardly in tandem, and considerately, or rather with a bit of panicked haste, pulled the bedroom door shut behind him. With a soft click, only the baby, who was still whining, and I were left in the room. Holding the child and looking at the tightly shut door, the heat on my face hadn't subsided. Yet inexplicably, I breathed a sigh of relief, mixed with a somewhat indescribable awkwardness. Outside the door, Charles leaned his back against the cold wall, let out a long sigh, and raised his hand to rub his still burning ears. But inappropriately, Elliot's slightly swollen chest flashed through his mind. His whole body had slimmed down, so the changes to his chest were especially obvious. He then thought of Elliot's flushed cheeks just now. He irritably ruffled his hair and cursed in a low voice. Damn it! That night, Charles slept extremely restlessly. He felt as if he was holding a warm, soft body in his arms. The skin was delicate, carrying a familiar, sweet coconut fragrance that tempted him to sink deeper. He subconsciously held the person tighter. The waist beneath his palm was so slender it couldn't fill his grasp, yet it possessed a resilient strength. He lowered his head, following his instinct to kiss that slightly swollen area. The touch was incredibly soft, carrying a bit of damp, milky scent that made all the blood in his body rush downward, leaving him restless and agitated. In the midst of his infatuation, he lifted his head, wanting to see the face of the person beneath him clearly. What met his eyes was Elliot, with his misty eyes and reddened outer corners, looking at him with a mix of reproach and resentment. Charles jolted and suddenly sprang up from the bed, his heart pounding like a drum. Thump, thump, thump. Fuck. Why would he dream about Elliot? And this kind of dream? In the darkness, he panted heavily. The tactile and visual impact of the dream was too real, making him unbearably hot all over. What made him break down even more was that when he threw off the blanket, the pitched tent glaringly declared the direct consequence of this dream. Motherfucker! He cursed lowly and practically stumbled into the bathroom, twisting open the cold water valve. Chapter 3. The next morning, Charles came downstairs with faint dark circles under his eyes. At a glance, he saw the figure in the kitchen. Elliot, with his back to him, was busy at the stove. Wearing slightly oversized loungewear, his figure appeared even thinner. A faint aroma of rice permeated the air, along with a barely there hint of Elliot's own coconut-scented pheromones. This should have been a warm and peaceful scene. But Charles's footsteps abruptly stopped in place, his throat tightening. The images from last night's dream uncontrollably surfaced again. That slender waist he had held tightly in his dream, that soft touch carrying a milky scent. He looked away almost instantly, feeling even more irritable inside. Hearing the footsteps, I turned around. Good morning. I made breakfast. Charles raised an eyebrow, a hint of disbelief in his tone. You know how to make breakfast? I nodded, bringing the softly boiled rice porridge and side dishes to the table. Yeah, it's embarrassing to live and eat here for free. Doing a little something is my way of repaying you. My voice gradually lowered, carrying a barely detectable hint of embarrassment. Charles didn't say anything more. He pulled out a chair and sat down. I pushed a bowl of porridge in front of him, hesitated for a moment, but still spoke. After we eat, could you accompany me to buy some things for the baby? What do you need? He took a spoonful of porridge. A stroller, I explained. That way, when I go out to look for a job, I can put the baby in the stroller. It'll be more convenient. Charles paused his movements. Thinking of that awkward dream last night, the words of refusal rolled around the tip of his tongue but were ultimately swallowed back down. He stiffly spat out a single word, "Fine." After that day, I was officially settled into Charles's home. Charles had to go to work at his conglomerate during the day. He was a very busy man. But occasionally, when he got off work early or was at home on weekends, he would clumsily help me take care of the child. From making formula that was either too hot or clumpy in the beginning, to later masterfully controlling the water temperature and shaking intensity. From the first time changing a diaper so flustered he almost tangled himself up with the baby, to later getting it done with agile movements. Even though he would still impatiently complain, "This little brat is so troublesome." His actions became more and more practiced each time. As for me, I found a job at a bakery near the apartment. The salary wasn't high, but fortunately, the boss was a kind beta woman. After learning about my situation, she allowed me to bring the baby to work. I finally didn't have to rely entirely on Charles. I could rely on my own abilities. Even if meager, I started to save money little by little, until the day the peace was broken. That night, Charles was still working overtime at the company. The baby had grown quite a bit since he first arrived and was becoming more active. Usually, he wouldn't obediently fall asleep until Charles came home from work and coaxed him with his stiff tone for ages. But that day, the little guy was unusually quiet. He fell asleep early, not making a fuss at all. At first, I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the child had become well-behaved. But nearing midnight, I touched his burning forehead, and my heart plummeted. The baby had a fever. His tiny body was curled up, his cheeks flushed red from the heat, and his breathing was a bit rapid. I panicked instantly. In the past, when I was still the young master of the Wilson family, I always had nannies and family doctors around me. I never had to worry about these kinds of things. After the baby was born, he had always been good and hadn't had any major illnesses, so I had no experience dealing with this. A massive fear gripped me instantly. No one accepted my ride request on the ride-hailing app for a long time, and I was so anxious that tears kept falling. Our time together these past few days had made me dependent on Charles. He was the only one I could think of right now. The moment the call connected, I spoke incoherently. "Charles, what do I do? The baby. The baby is sick. He has a fever, and I can't get a car." On the other end of the phone, Charles seemed to freeze for a moment. Then his tone suddenly became tense, carrying a soothing undertone. "Don't panic. I'm coming back right now." Hanging up the phone, Charles stared at his computer screen, unable to read a single word. His mind was full of Elliot's crying, panicked, and helpless voice. He irritably tugged at his tie. That familiar urge to protect the other person under his wings surged up again, stronger than ever before. He grabbed his car keys and practically ran toward the elevator. When he returned home, he saw Elliot holding the child, tear stains still on his face and his eyes red and swollen. Seeing him come back, the dependence and fragility in Elliot's eyes practically overflowed. Charles felt as if his heart had been ruthlessly squeezed by something. He didn't ask anything. He stepped forward directly and with unusual firmness, took the child from Elliot's arms. "To the hospital. The baby just had a bit of a fever. The doctor said it was the seasonal flu and recommended staying in the hospital for observation for one night." It wasn't until the latter half of the night that the baby's temperature finally dropped, and he slept deeply. My nerves, which had been tense all night, finally relaxed. Charles didn't say much, but he stayed by our side the whole time, paying the fees, getting the medicine, communicating with the doctor, handling everything perfectly. Looking at Elliot, That indescribable irritability in his heart returned, mixed with an unfamiliar tenderness. His voice was much deeper and softer than usual. "It's okay now. The doctor said it's not a big problem. I'm here, don't be afraid." That phrase, "I'm here," seemed to poke the softest and most aggrieved place in my heart. The hardship of raising the child alone these past few days, the panic and helplessness when I just found out the baby was sick, all the emotions surged out at this moment. I couldn't help but throw myself into his arms, burying my face in his chest that carried the faint scent of coffee pheromones. My voice muffled. "Charles, you're so good. I really wouldn't know what to do without you." Charles's body stiffened. Feeling the warm, soft body and subtle trembling in his arms, he finally raised his hands and somewhat stiffly patted Elliot's thin back. He responded in a low voice, his Adam's apple bobbing unconsciously. Under the soft lighting of the corridor, their embracing figures, with the peacefully sleeping baby on the bed next to them, looked exactly like a family of three. He looked down at the soft crown of the person in his arms, smelling that sweet coconut fragrance tinged with a milky scent, and for the first time felt that if things stayed like this forever, it wouldn't be bad. I leaned in his embrace, my heart feeling both sour and swollen. These past few days, Charles had been really good to me and the baby. He complained verbally, but his actions never mistreated us. He learned to take care of the child, tacitly allowed me to stay, and appeared at the first moment when I was most helpless. He probably likes the baby, right? Maybe I should tell him the truth? Tell him that the baby is our child. But as the words reached my lips, it felt as if they were blocked by something. What if he knew the truth and remembered what happened that night? What would he think? Even though that night was an accident, my heat cycle clashing with his drunkenness. In his eyes, would he think I designed it on purpose? After all, he used to hate me so much and had said so many hurtful things. If he knew the child was his, would he think I wanted to use the child to tie him down and make him take responsibility? Would he hate me even more, or even snatch the baby away from me? Just thinking about the look of disgust Charles might show, or his possible cold questioning, the courage I had just mustered vanished. Charles felt the dependence of the person in his arms. It was as if his heart had been filled by something, turning into an absolute puddle of mush. He only had to lower his head to smell the faint coconut scent on Elliot. In the past, he thought the smell was a bit cloyingly sweet, but now it smelled very comforting, soothing his restless emotions. Fuck, what kind of fate is this? The bitter rival he had gone toe-to-toe with for over a decade was now not only being held in his arms, but he also had to worry every day about him and his child with some unknown bastard alpha. He cursed irritably in his heart, feeling that he was becoming more and more abnormal. Chapter 4. Elliot, why are you here? I looked up and saw a familiar figure. It was Gabriel, my senior. He was 2 years ahead of me, came from a good family, and was modest and gentle. Back when my family went under, he was one of the few who genuinely wanted to help. He even offered financial assistance, but I politely declined because I didn't want to owe anyone. I stood up, feeling a bit awkward. "Senior Gabriel, the baby has a slight fever, so we came to get him checked out," I explained, pointing toward the inside of the ward. Gabriel peeked in at the sleeping baby. His tone held concern, along with a barely detectable hint of reproach. "I wasn't on the night shift last night and just finished handing over. Why didn't you contact me? I could have at least helped you arrange things faster." "It's fine, Senior. Everything is taken care of. The doctor said we can go home once observation is done and everything looks okay." I smiled apologetically, feeling a bit guilty when I thought about how I had rejected him before. Gabriel looked at me gently, carrying his usual kindness. "Elliot, I know you have a strong personality, but if you run into any difficulties, you must tell me. I've always been here." He paused, his voice softening. "Sometimes, I really wish you wouldn't always push me away." The protectiveness and unspoken meaning in his words made my heart tremble. Feeling even more apologetic, I could only whisper, "Thank you, Senior." Gabriel had pursued me before, and he didn't give up even after finding out I was pregnant. But I simply didn't have those kinds of feelings for him, so how could I accept his help? Just then, a cold, hard voice cut in, laced with obvious displeasure. Who is he? I turned around and saw that Charles had returned at some point. He was holding steaming porridge and steamed buns, but his face was gloomier than the sky outside. His sharp gaze swept over Gabriel like a knife, his body radiating a low-pressure aura. Gabriel looked at Charles, then at the baby. He stared at me, his tone certain. Is it him? I understood what he meant and nodded. I see. It looks like I completely lost my chance. When had Charles ever been ignored like this? Moreover, seeing this alpha talking to Elliot like that made him instantly furious. Who are you? Gabriel offered a mild smile. I'm Elliot Sr. I came to check on him and the baby. Gabriel looked at Charles's dark expression, then at my awkward face, and gave a knowing, somewhat helpless, gentle smile. I have work to do, so I'll get going. Elliot, bring the baby out to play when you have time. His tone was as gentle as ever. I nodded, feeling relieved but also a bit guilty. Goodbye, Senior. Gabriel turned and left, leaving only Charles and me in the ward. He shoved the breakfast bags into my arms. His movements were so rough that the porridge almost spilled. His face was livid, his chest heaving slightly. He was clearly still furious, asking through gritted teeth. Is he that scumbag? I didn't register it at first. What scumbag? Who else? Charles's voice suddenly rose, but mindful of the baby in the room, he forcibly suppressed it, making him sound even more furious. The baby's father. It's him, isn't it? He looks like a decent guy, but he actually abandoned his partner and child, and you were just smiling so happily at him. After saying that, his face darkened even more, venting all his pent-up resentment. You're still thinking about a scumbag like him? What's so good about him? What exactly is going through your head? The more he spoke, the angrier he got. Looking at Elliot's dazed expression, an inexplicable sense of grievance and frustration rushed to his head, and he blurted out, I've been taking care of you two for so long. A full-grown man is standing right in front of you. Can't you see me? The moment those words came out, both he and I froze. What was he saying? Charles also realized he had misspoken. A flash of awkwardness crossed his face, and he whipped his head away. He irritably ran his hand through his hair and stiffly changed the subject, his tone turning freezing cold again. Nothing. Hurry up and eat your breakfast. It's getting cold. After that day, the relationship between Charles and me became somewhat awkward. As luck would have it, Charles received an urgent assignment and had to go on a business trip for a week. The day he left, he only stiffly said, Take care of yourself and the child, before dragging his suitcase away. The house suddenly grew quiet, leaving only me and the baby. The space was obviously larger, yet my heart felt like a piece was missing. That day, I was holding the baby and playing in the living room when a familiar wave of burning heat suddenly radiated from my lower abdomen, making my legs feel weak. Oh no, it's my heat. Since having the baby, I hadn't experienced a heat cycle and had almost forgotten about it. I barely managed to coax the baby to sleep and put him in the crib, but the heat waves inside my body grew stronger and stronger. My consciousness began to blur, and a rich, sweet coconut scent spread out uncontrollably. I never expected Charles to return at this exact moment. Charles pushed the door open. The living room and kitchen were quiet, and he didn't see anyone. Elliot? He called out a few times, but there was no response. A sweet scent seemed to drift in the air. He felt his heart tighten, and he quickly walked toward the master bedroom, pushing the door open. The rich, sweet scent of coconut rushed at his face, enveloping him. You're in heat. His voice was a bit hoarse. He subconsciously wanted to step back, but his feet felt nailed to the floor. The intense pheromones of an omega in heat were too great a temptation for him as an alpha, and his own pheromones began to agitate uncontrollably. He turned abruptly, his tone deliberately pretending to be cold. I'll go buy you suppressants. For an omega who has been fully marked and has given birth, the body develops a deep dependency on their alpha's pheromones. Ordinary suppressants are practically useless. A massive emptiness and craving swallowed me. Seeing him about to leave, panic overcame reason. I instinctively reached out and grabbed the hem of his shirt, my voice crying and distressed, Don't go. Suppressants won't work. Charles's body stiffened. He looked back at my hand, pulling his shirt, emotions surging in the depths of his eyes. Of course he knew why they wouldn't work. Thinking of the alpha who had marked Elliot and rendered the suppressants useless for him, an anonymous fury mixed with intense possessiveness welled up. He let out an irritable, low growl, suddenly leaning down and trapping me between him and the bed. They won't work? Then what do you want? Do you want me to go find that man and bring him back to you? He spoke almost through gritted teeth, every word laced with fiery anger. Impossible. Elliot, don't even think about it. You can only stay by my side. You can't go anywhere. This familiar, domineering tone made me vaguely feel like I was back in the days when we used to butt heads. He was always like this, overbearing and unreasonable. But right now, the agony of my heat mixed with the grievance of being trapped by him made me desperately want to know what right he had to say such things. Tears couldn't help but fall, and I questioned him through my sobs. What do you mean? Charles, you've always hated me, yelled at me, treated me poorly, and recently you've been avoiding me. You really just want me to leave sooner, don't you? I accused him with tear-blurred eyes. Thinking back to our school days, Charles was so outstanding. Anyone would be attracted to a handsome, excellent alpha, and I was no exception. But whenever I wanted to get closer, all I received was his hostility. I knew very well that Charles hated me, for no reason at all. When did I ever tell you to leave? You did. You said you hated me before. His tone was fierce. That was before. Before. I latched onto his words and stubbornly pressed him. The heat made my emotions especially sensitive and direct. What about now? What does not hating mean? Charles was cornered by my questions with nowhere to hide. He took a deep breath, looked into my eyes, and spoke in a rushed, aggressive tone, yet carrying a reckless honesty. I like you now. Are you happy? Chapter 5. A surging wave of emotion instantly rushed out, overwhelming Charles. Yes, he had fallen for this Omega a long time ago. He didn't know exactly when it started. Perhaps it was when he saw Elliot sleeping so carefully in his bed, holding the baby. Perhaps it was the complete reliance he showed when crying and calling for help late at night. Or maybe even earlier, when Elliot showed up at his door in a wretched state with a child. And despite saying harsh words, Charles couldn't help but soften his heart and let him in. His feelings had changed long ago, but he had always refused to admit it, deceiving himself with ridiculous excuses like sworn enemies or protective instinct. It wasn't until he was in the hospital, seeing that alpha named Gabriel being so close to Elliot, that the explosive burst of hostility and possessiveness in his heart completely woke him up. He was so angry then that he spouted nonsense about a scumbag abandoning his partner and child. Rather than saying he was accusing that hypothetical father of the child, it would be more accurate to say he was venting his own dark, barely concealable jealousy. He was afraid that Elliot truly had someone else in his heart. Now, those long-suppressed thoughts could no longer be hidden. He remembered why he had hated Elliot so much a long time ago. It was because Elliot was always so beautiful and proud, like a brilliant little sun, attracting everyone's gaze wherever he went, especially those alphas, who always swarmed around him like bees to honey. When he was young, Charles didn't understand what that irritable emotion was whenever he saw Elliot smiling at others. He just felt that this Omega was an eyesore, stealing everyone's attention. He mistook that inexplicable possessiveness and irritation for hatred. So he started working against him, using competition and provocation to attract his attention, as if this was the only way to prove that he was special. He used the wrong method, turning a budding, ignorant crush into over a decade of being at each other's throats. It wasn't until Elliot showed up at his door with a child that their paths crossed again. He thought he was too late. He thought that Elliot could never be his. Just as he was immersed in his thoughts, the person beneath him reached out and tugged at his collar. With breath practically ghosting over his ear, he heard Elliot say, "Charles, mark me." With a boom, Charles's reason completely collapsed. Charles had a dream. In the dream, he returned to the night after the graduation ceremony. He had drunk a lot of alcohol. Feeling top-heavy, he only wanted to find a place to lie down. He stumbled into the room he had booked upstairs. Just as he collapsed onto the bed, the door was suddenly slammed open. A figure stumbled and rushed in, carrying an abnormally thick, cloyingly sweet coconut scent that instantly filled the entire room. Even though he had drunk a lot, he still recognized him. It was Elliot. His cheeks were flushed with an unnatural red, his eyes glazed, and his breathing ragged, practically collapsing softly by the side of the bed. Slender fingers tightly gripped Charles's sleeve, his voice carrying a sob and unbearable agony. "Charles, I'm in heat. It hurts so much. Can you help me?" Charles himself was heavily intoxicated, his brain a mess, but this familiar pheromone and the fragile, helpless look of the person in front of him acted like a spark, instantly igniting his most primal instincts as an alpha. All thoughts of being sworn enemies or rivals blurred in that moment. He only remembered that cloyingly sweet coconut scent tempting him, and Elliot's tear-filled, pleading eyes. What happened next was chaotic and blurred. Guided only by instinct, he tightly embraced the Omega who kept nuzzling into his arms, radiating that enticing scent. Beneath his palms was delicate, burning skin. In his ears were suppressed whimpers and pants. Following his alpha nature, he lowered his head, biting down fiercely on the gland at the back of the other's neck and injecting his own pheromones. He used the most direct method to soothe the heat-fevered Omega beneath him, nodding inside him. He sank into that ultimate sensation until he lost consciousness. When he woke up the next day, he was alone in the room, having forgotten everything completely. Chapter 6. The next day, I woke up in Charles's arms. The moment I regained consciousness, my body felt it first. Soreness, especially the distinct throbbing ache from where the back of my neck had been temporarily marked. But more than that was the profound sense of security and satisfaction of being enveloped in his rich coffee pheromones. I moved slightly, only to meet a pair of deep eyes. I didn't know how long Charles had been awake, but he had been watching me all along. His gaze was complex. There was the lingering trace of arousal, the ecstasy of regaining what was lost, but mostly, it was a heavy, overflowing remorse and heartache. My cheeks instantly flushed red. I remembered everything from last night crystal clear. A fully marked Omega will only accept their own alpha's pheromones, which meant Charles had thoroughly marked me before. I lowered my eyes in embarrassment. My voice as quiet as a mosquito. Last night, darling. He spoke, his voice carrying the huskiness of just waking up, yet exceptionally firm. He called me darling, no longer the cold Elliot. This intimate form of address made my heart tremble, and I subconsciously looked up at him. "I won't forget again." He looked at me, enunciating every word, as serious as if he were making a vow. "From now on, I will never forget anything about you." Those words were like a key, instantly unlocking the grievances and sorrow that had been building up in my heart for so long. Tears welled up without warning, blurring my vision. My voice choked with a trembling disbelief. "You finally remembered? He responded, stretching out his arms and pulling me tightly, so tightly, into his embrace. He rested his chin on the top of my head, carrying endless lingering fear and self-blame. I remembered everything. I remembered the night of graduation. I remembered it was you. "I'm sorry, Elliot. I'm sorry for making you endure so much all by yourself." He paused, his arms tightening further, his voice carrying an indescribable emotion and absolute certainty. "It was my fault for letting you raise our baby alone for so long, and making it so hard for you." I couldn't hold back anymore and buried my face in his chest to complain. "It took you so long to remember." Charles let me pound my fists against his chest. Not only was he not angry, but he also laughed softly, the sound full of relief and doting affection. He held me close, pulling me even tighter. He nuzzled his chin against the top of my head, his tone softer and more playful than ever before. "That's right. I'm so stupid. What would I do if I ever had to leave you?" He lowered his head. "So I can't be without you, Elliot. The three of us, our family, will never be apart again." Okay. If you enjoyed this story, remember to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.